Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hi there and welcome to another episode of the Mind Solution podcast. My name is Sarah Maud and I'm delighted to have you here because today I'm going to be talking about burnout, but from a very different perspective. So if you are a woman in leadership and you are exhausted, if you feel like despite getting 9, 10, 11 hours of sleep at night, you still feel knackered, you feel numb, you feel disconnected, you feel like you're doing all the right things to try and improve your energy levels, but it's not working, then this episode is for you. Now, if I was to go all the way back through space and time to when I worked in human resources, I think it's reasonable to say that the topic of burnout was pretty much non-existent. We talked about stress, but burnout was something that wasn't really discussed. Certainly not from my experience. And I worked with some hard-hitting big players like British Airways, Virgin Atlantic, Carnival UK, De Vere Hotels. And in fact, it was only when I started to study solution-focused psychotherapy and hypnotherapy, which I am going back about 13 years ago now, that I even understood stress. In fact, it was the weekend that I was learning about the neuroscience of stress that I had my light bulb moment and I realized that I'd spent a big chunk of my HR career actually living in the hormones of stress and I didn't even know about it. And to me, that insight was so profound that I created the intention right there and then to take this information back into the workplace because I could see that this was the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Yet fast forward to the present day and the topic of stress and burnout is discussed all across the globe. And yet what strikes me is that the problem's not going away. So we know far, far more about stress, signs of stress, self-care measures, how to prevent burnout. We've got HR leaders across the globe that are actively working on well-being strategies and well-being initiatives to help to reduce stress, prevent burnout, create the right organizational cultures, and yet the problem still persists. In fact, an example of that is one that I like to use. Back in 2021, Bumble, the dating app, actually closed its offices for a week to 700 of its employees in a bid to combat stress and burnout. Now, for an organization like Bumble that have actually got unicorn status, and that doesn't mean unicorn in the way that I think of unicorns because I live in Scotland, but they are valued at $1 billion on the stock exchange. So they are a unicorn company. But that's a big decision and it's a costly decision. And it's one for a very different podcast because I would love to know what the warning signs are, because burnout is not something that just happens overnight. So the problem isn't going away despite the fact that we know way more about stress and burnout than ever. And this is why I want to come at this from a very different angle, especially if you are a woman in leadership and you can't work out why you're still feeling exhausted. Because from my point of view, burnout isn't just about working too hard. I know from my work with women in the workplace that burnout is also from not getting your emotional needs met. So if you are a woman in leadership and you feel like you are doing all the right things, that you are taking supplements, you've made changes to your diary, you're trying not to cram in meeting after meeting after meeting, you're getting to bed a little bit earlier, maybe you've even started to do a little bit more yoga, but you're still exhausted, then my invitation is for you to look at your relationships. And my invitation is to ask yourself, do you feel like you're heard in your relationships? Thinking about your closest relationships, especially if you are in an intimate relationship, a romantic relationship with your partner, with your spouse, do you feel like you're actually heard? Does your partner check in with you? And when they do check in with you, do they actually listen? Do they just sit and listen? Or do they have a tendency to try and give unsolicited advice? Or to try and start fixing the problem or strategizing or telling you what you should do? Do they just listen? Are they consistent with the way that they show up in the relationship? And when you speak about how you're feeling, what's going on for you, do you feel safe? Do you feel safe to be vulnerable in your relationships? Do you feel like you can speak to your partner without being judged? Do you feel like they've got your back? Do you feel like you know where you stand with them? Do you feel like the relationship is reciprocal? That they are giving to you as much as you are giving to them? Because here is what I observe working with women in leadership is, yes, burnout does sometimes come from working long hours, from having a dysregulated nervous system, from always being switched on, from not prioritizing self-care, from going on holiday and you're still answering emails while you're sat on your sun lounger ordering another pina colada. Yes, burnout does come from those things. But what I really find fascinating is how so many of the conversations that I have with women in leadership come to the relationship with their partner, with their spouse, and actually not feeling heard, not feeling listened to. And in fact, one example that I'll share with you actually comes from a guy that I worked with. So whilst I do specialize in working with women in leadership, men do still come across my path. And I'd had a referral from somebody to work with a guy who's a CEO of a large organization. And He was originally referred to me because he was struggling with his sleep, feeling like he was always switched on. And so we had a chat and I agreed to work with him. And what was interesting is how the conversation swung around to his relationship with his wife. Now, this is a guy that had been married for 17 years. He's the main breadwinner, a lot of responsibility on his plate. And we'd got onto the conversation about the relationship with his wife because we've been talking about the bedroom, we've been talking about his bedtime routine, we've been talking even about his sex life. But what I found fascinating was that this was a man that actually struck me as very self-aware, very grounded, really, really into personal development, trying to improve himself, being the best version of himself that he can be. He was a big, big reader of personal development books, podcasts, and was very articulate, certainly with me, at being able to articulate how he was feeling. And he was really honest and he said, I actually don't feel appreciated in my marriage. I don't feel that I'm really heard or listened to. And what he described, which you might resonate with from your own experience, is when he got home, his wife would often ask him, how you doing? How was your day? But then she wouldn't really listen to the response. She'd either be on her phone, she'd have her head in the fridge, she might be starting to cook dinner. She'd be very distracted. She wouldn't be present with him. And what he described is, there are lots of different aspects to my day. I can't just always generically start to sum up my day. And sometimes it would be easier to just follow the path of least resistance and say, yeah, it was fine. How was yours? And I'm sure you're probably more than familiar with those kind of conversations where we literally just almost deny ourselves being able to express what's really going on for us because the path of least resistance is, yeah, I'm fine. How are you? What should we have for dinner? If you resonate with that, trust me, you are not alone. But over a period of time, where we're in relationships, even if we've been married for 20 years, if we don't feel that we're heard, if we don't feel that that person is there to listen to us, what it leads to is us not getting our emotional needs met. We'll end up feeling very isolated in the relationship. We feel lonely. We can feel actually quite in conflict with the people that we love. We can even feel completely invalidated. We can feel disconnected. We can feel numb. And so even though we are in these relationships, we're not necessarily happy. And it can be very difficult to know what to do, and we can actually become even more entrenched within ourselves to the point that it becomes really hard to express what it is that we need. And so if we don't have that in our romantic relationships, and even if you're not in an intimate romantic relationships, look at your friendships. How much are your friends actually there for you? How much do they really listen? And listening is a skill, it's a gift. It's one of the reasons that we teach it at the Mind Solution, because I know from my own experience of working as both a therapist and as a coach for 13 years, one of the things that people value so much, that is so powerful, is having somebody listen. and really, really listen. Listen in a way that is non-judgmental. And I've lost count of the amount of people over the last 13 years that have shared something with me that they've never shared with their partner, with their closest loved ones. And again, it's really tricky if we've got people in our lives that we can only maybe feel like we have surface level conversations with, that we maybe start to try and talk about something that's going on for us. It could be something at work, it could be something with our health, it could just be that we're just feeling really lost or at a crossroads. It could be any number of things, but things that are causing us emotional distress, things that are weighing us down, things that feel like a burden and we're not sure how to move forward. And the thing is with these things is we're not necessarily looking for a magic solution. We're not always looking for specific advice. We just want somebody that is there to listen. And if they give me a hug and pour me a glass of wine and maybe pour me a bath, well, I love them even more. But I know myself, if I'm talking to a friend, about, I'm not talking to them because I want advice. Unless it's something like, you know, a DIY issue, and then advice can sometimes be really helpful. But if it's something that is meaningful to me, sometimes it really is just about being heard. And so the less that we feel heard in our relationships, the more that that can lead to isolation. And in our friendships, I have the I am blessed in that I have got a lot of friends who are fellow therapists, and that's a wonderful, wonderful gift to have, because I know that I can talk and I will be heard. I'll be listened to. I'll feel supported. I feel safe to be vulnerable. And that is like gold dust in a relationship. But not everybody has that. You might have friends in your life that when you start to attempt to share something, they steal the conversation. They make it all about them, or they start talking over you. They start telling you what you should do, or because they're not used to feeling things that are uncomfortable, they try to reframe it. They might say, well, at least you didn't do this, or they try and reframe it. And the reason that they try to reframe it is because it feels uncomfortable. It takes somebody that is self-aware and secure to be able to really hold that space. So if you're listening to this and this is resonating with you, it might be that this is resonating with you because you think, actually, I'm a bit guilty for not listening to my partner. I'm a bit guilty of being distracted when they start to talk to me about their day. And if you clock that, you register that, my invitation is, don't judge yourself. Self-awareness and consciousness are crucial, absolutely crucial. So recognizing that means that you can start to change your own response. You can start to do something better. You can start to do something different. So my invitation is, in your relationships, when you ask your friend, your loved one, your partner, your spouse, how are you? How are you really doing? You just practice listening. And it might feel like you need to sit on your hands, you might need to bite your lip, bite your tongue to really practice listening, listening without judgment, listening with nothing on your mind, listening with no agenda, and just noticing where that reflective, I just want to jump in and start saying something, just noticing it. And again, just practicing settling yourself down. And when your partner does share something, instead of saying something that's trying to reframe it, like at least or something along those lines, is actually to validate their emotions. Saying something like, it sounds like you're feeling upset. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated. It sounds like you're feeling stressed. Sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed. Tell me more about what's been going on for you. And then just practice shutting up and listening. And the more that we do this, we're going to work on our emotional responses, our emotional reactivity, but we're going to strengthen the relationship. There's that wonderful, wonderful saying that we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And in our relationships, we have to be the change that we want to see in the relationships. Now, it might be that you're already doing this. Maybe you're listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, but I already do that and they never listen. Well, if that's the case, then this is where a conversation might need to be had. It's very likely needs to be had. So going back to the chief exec that I worked with, we talked about how he can have this conversation with his wife, how he can approach this conversation with her so that he can talk about his feelings, he can talk about what he needs from the relationship. So one of the first things that we did, because both of them had very, very busy schedules. She's a mum with her own business, trying to get her own business off the ground, and 3 children. And he's a chief exec. Time it felt to them more like a luxury. So one of the things that we talked about was about picking the right time and the right setting. Talking about where it's possible to go out to one of their favorite restaurants where it's just the two of them and they can talk about their relationship. Something I often hear with couples is that we go out for dinner and we start talking about the kids. And in fact, one of my friends that I do body combat with gave me this exact example where she'd gone out with her partner and all that they talked about was the children. And she said, I don't really want to talk about my kids all the time. I just actually wanted to talk about something that didn't involve the children, which is fair enough. You were individuals before you came into this relationship, and quite often women particularly feel like they've lost their identity and everything becomes about the children. So picking the right time and environment are really crucial for having those potentially emotionally charged conversations. What you don't want to do is you don't want to bring it up during moments of anger or stress or exhaustion, or when you just know that they're not listening. If they're scrolling on their laptop or on their iPhone or whatever, that's not the time to have that conversation. But talking to them about, actually, there's something on my mind I'd really like to share with you, but I really want to make sure that it's a good time for us to have this conversation. I want us to have a a connected conversation, a meaningful conversation, a conversation where we're not running around like two blue-assed flies. You know, what about going out for dinner this Thursday? Or something along those lines. And you might then be thinking, okay, I can do that, but how do I actually bring up the conversation? Well, what I would suggest is that when you do bring up the conversation, to use I statements. There can be a risk when we want to share something that's quite emotionally charged of saying, you know, you never listen to me, or you never ask about my day, or you never empty the dishwasher, or you. That is the worst place you can start any conversation, because that's just going to create defensiveness, it's going to create fights, it's just going to crumble. So starting any statement with I instead of you helps to prevent World War III from breaking out. And it can lead to a conversation that's less defensive. So really focusing on expressing how you feel and what you need rather than what your partner's doing wrong. Because quite often, especially in today's age, which is heartbreaking really, but people might not have the awareness of the impact that they're having. They might just be very distracted. You know, in this particular case, the wife had potentially ADHD. So her mind worked in a very different way. It was running at 100 miles an hour. So it might be that she wasn't really aware of the impact that she was having. And it's really beautiful when I see women have these conversations with their partner, and it creates that insight with the other person. And they say, God, do you know what? You're right. You're right. I didn't realize. You're right. I've not been showing up for you. I've been distracted. I've had my own shit going on. Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about what is it that we need to work together as a team to create greater sense of connection. And those breakthroughs are absolutely beautiful, and they are absolutely possible. So it could be that you do go out for dinner, or you go out for a walk, or whatever is the right time and date, and just say, I've just been feeling quite disconnected, and I really want to feel like we used to. I want to feel closer to you. I want to feel like we're teammates again. And sometimes I just feel like I'm not fully heard when I share how I'm feeling. And it's important to me. It's important that I feel that we are on the same team. So can we talk about more ways that we can get back to that space? You know, what we don't really want to do when it comes to getting our emotional needs met is to give the person a really long list of all the things that they're not doing, but to get really clear on what it is that we need from the relationship. What does that look like? And to try to frame that in a positive way. And it might be that it's useful for you to spend some time either just with your journal or a notebook, thinking about actually what is it that you do need from the relationship, and the easiest way that you can phrase that so that your needs are heard in a way that lands well. So I trust that this has given you some food for thought. If this has really resonated with you and you feel like actually this is something I really want to get some help with, and I'm a woman in leadership. I am knackered. Maybe my relationships aren't working. And also, if you're ready to upgrade old identities of imposter syndrome, perfectionism, feeling like you're not good enough, and you are ready to own your self-worth, then use the link down below and book a consultation and let's have a conversation. But in the meantime, thank you so, so much for listening. If you loved what you heard, I'd love to hear it in the comments. I'd love you to meet my emotional needs and to rate the podcast. And I look forward to you joining me again in the future. Bye bye.